we're living in an era today where there's a lot of talk about being woke, right? And this whole
Mm,
movement around wokeness. And any of us that started maybe to practice Islam, there's this awakening that happens. There's this realization that we come to at some point in our life. And I think this awakening is a huge, huge thing. Like, even as we're recording this podcast, I just saw Andrew Tate becoming Muslim. He's
mhm.
accepted Islam, right? So there's a massive amount of awakening that happens when you go from a non-Muslim to a Muslim. But the same thing happens to a lot of practicing Muslims who, at the start of their life, maybe they weren't so much into Islam.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to our next episode of Transformation Mastery, in which we are talking about deep transformation, looking at classical texts and combining it with modern works in personal development, our own experiences, and sharing a lot of different things with you. Assalamu alaikum, Muhammad. How are you doing this
Wa
morning?
alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Alhamdulillah, I'm good, bro. Good to be here.
Alhamdulillah. Likewise. Okay, Bismillah. Let's begin. So today we'll be talking about one of the stages that happens in one's transformation, and that's usually the earliest stage, and that's about awakening and realizing who we are, why we are here, what is our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how does this whole thing work. So we'll be talking about awakening. The first thing that happens in awakening, and as we get into what we can do to facilitate that awakening, is about the realization of how many great things that we have from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So typically when we wake up, there's one or two top questions that we have. Why am I not married? Why don't I have kids? Or why is my family not doing great? Or why don't I have a job? Why don't I have enough money? Or something like that. We're thinking about some sort of problem that we typically wake up. And we don't realize that all the amazing things that we have that we didn't have to ask for, that we didn't really have to strive for, and this just exists for us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we haven't really earned it, we really don't deserve it, but Allah has given these things to us. So I'd like to hear some of your thoughts around this notion of the focus question, or the big question that we all usually wake up with.
Yeah, I think I just want to take a moment to think a little bit about the awakening, because I think like we're living in an era today where there's a lot of talk about being woke, right? And this whole
Mm,
movement around wokeness and stuff. And I think that any of us that started maybe to practice Islam, maybe we didn't, there's this awakening that happens. There's this realization that we come to at some point in our life. And I think this awakening is a huge, huge thing. Like, even as we're recording this podcast, I just saw the whole thing around Andrew Tate becoming Muslim. He's
mhm.
accepted Islam, right? So there's a massive amount of awakening that happens when you go from a non-Muslim to a Muslim. But the same thing happens to a lot of practicing Muslims who, at the start of their life, maybe they weren't so much into Islam. So I think the awakening as a whole is a really, really big, important topic. And I think something that we should all be thinking about, because I think as you go on in life, sometimes what happens is that you become stale. Like, if you've been practicing 2, 3, 4, 5 years, it's kind of like you need another awakening, because it's been like 2, 3, 4 years where you've been in the mode. And I remember what it was like for me when I first started practicing. You're thinking about, how amazing it feels to pray to Allah, how amazing it feels to learn about Allah, how amazing it is to worship in Allah in all these different ways. But then as it becomes more routine, it starts to kind of like get stale. And so I think having that reawakening is really, really important. So for me, it's really interesting, not only the feelings around the awakening, but how we then gonna reawaken ourselves. And I think some of the points that you're bringing up, they're really good in terms of like realizing. Uh, I guess awakening part of it, would you say, is to do with seeing, not just in the sense of sight, but actually your heart and your mind seeing and realizing certain things.
Absolutely, yes, yes. And I think that's actually will be one of the topics that we'll have in one of the future episodes, with the state of what's called the basira in Arabic. It's like you actually seeing through, right? And for sure, I think that's maybe one can argue like maybe a deeper state. But picking up off your point about reawakening, I think that's really a good point, because you have these different layers. One is like, you're coming back from, totally maybe a heedless life to something, and then
Mm,
or you have already been awakened, and then you have had really high levels of iman, and focus dropping down. right? And I think both of these are really, really important. And hopefully, some of our work with the transformation series will be helpful in that. Because one thing I realized that when I started practicing or going to, consciously going to, study circles and circles of knowledge and what have you, one thing I realized is that, the books that we were studying or that the halakha and what have you, and I would see people that are in those circles and they're going through the same books and they have already gone through this book like 5 times. I'm like, bro, why are you here? Right. So I had this notion of that, okay, it's just like learning and then that's it. And then you move on. Right. And then he's like, I don't think you understand what seeking knowledge means. And so that was or something to that effect. And that comment stuck with me. I realized that, look, it's not something that you are done with. And then you need those sort of reminders. And as I was reading and looking forward to having this discussion with you, that was like, these are things that you have learned and you've seen before, but just like revisiting it and thinking about it, and you realize that, what, I don't do that anymore, or I've forgotten that practice, or I've forgotten that habit, and then it kind of reawakens you. So I think that's a really good
Yeah.
point about.
And this is a big thing you've just said actually, which is the whole thing around the relationship between knowledge and implementing the knowledge. Because in a way, you're right. Like you might read a book, right, and then you're like, why would you read a book again, type of thing. But the whole objective is for it to move you to do
Mhm.
something, so that it benefits you in your life. And a lot of the time, like I read a lot of books, right, audio books mostly, and as you go through them, you're like on this race where you're just going from one to the other, to the other, to the other. But it's so true. Like the whole objective of the knowledge is to bring you closer to Allah, is to move you, is to have influence over you. So it is possible that you could read one book and then you could read that same book again and it could do the same thing for you, you know? And that's why, like, it's true. Like when I think about some of the audiobooks that I really, really enjoy that are really beneficial, I've listened to them multiple times, and each time I've got something more from it. And the Quran is the ultimate book. And so when you get into the Quran, it's going to be a whole nother level of benefit that just keeps coming and coming and coming. And I think this is the thing that we kind of need, that awakening every day. And this is what I like what you were saying at the start about like having a daily thing where you're kind of waking up. Like, what do you wake up with? What question do you wake up with? Like, do you have this kind of notion of, my life's so messed up because of X, Y, Z reason? Like, is that what you're waking up with, right? Or are you waking up with my life's so amazing because of X, Y, Z reason? You know. So there's a lot here in terms of like, can you have that awakening every day? Or is it
Mhm.
something that comes, when you nearly die, may Allah protect us, or something big happens?
Yes. So I think going back to me, like what sticks out again, going back to this, what the author has mentioned there, is to wake up with happiness and with realizing the favors of Allah, right? And I think this is also from a ritualistic perspective, right? When we wake up,
Yeah,
it's like Alhamdulillah, Lazi, right? And then so we are realizing and we are actually waking up with, thanking for something that, hey, I have a new day now, right? I have a new day. Like that's another opportunity, right? That Allah has given us to do
yeah,
something with it and whatever we want to make happen from that day. But either we don't have this, at a verbal level, or sometimes we have it at a verbal level, but then we are still waking up with, oh, I don't want to wake up, I don't, maybe put it on a snooze, or I have to deal with this
yeah,
thing, or I'm going to wake up and take a look at what's happening in the world today, right? So boom, all
yeah.
of a sudden, then I might see all the fleshy stuff going around me, and then that state of gratitude and that state of happiness is gone.
Yeah, I think this is a really important point that you made as well, and I think that we can actually control the way we wake up, right? Because of
Mhm.
what you said there, it reminded me. There was one time when I was really, really ill, and I was in bed, and for days I was in bed, and I was so ill, and I was in pain, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I was in pain, and I was discomfort, and all of that. But I reached my phone and I started going on my phone. And I was thinking to myself, like, you're so ill and you're so messed up, and still you're reaching for your phone, right? It's messed up. So then that day, I made a decision. I said, from now on, inshallah, I will never check my phone unless go and do the other things that are important first, right? So I made
Mhm.
this rule that unless I've done wudu, prayed, you know, at least, then I can't check my phone. But ideally, do my morning routine with azkar and the other things that I do, like do it that way. Why? Because when you start your day in that way, it's totally different. Like sometimes you can wake up, like you said, like you're pressing snooze, right? And then you're like, okay, let me check my message. And then you see someone in a WhatsApp group is saying something stupid, or they're replying to your message and it's getting you frustrated. So you just kind of like look at it, you start your day like that, and then you go in your thinking and all this kind of stuff. Whereas if you leave the whole world alone and you just go make wudu, just entertain just Allah and just speak to Allah and the words of Allah and all this stuff. And then once you're done with that, like you can imagine the calm peace that comes from doing that. And then you're like, okay, I'm ready for the work. And I think that perspective, it wakes you up in a very different way.
Right. Yeah. And to follow up on that, I think from awakening, the reason I think we might sometimes do that is like we need something, some sort of trigger to awaken us, like physically awaken us, like as you said, like in some interesting comment or some funny stuff or some sort of thing. And I think that's just a subconscious thing that sometimes we may also have this relationship with food that you're not feeling great, and we would say, okay, you know what, if I eat
Mm,
something, I might feel great. But I think we
yeah.
don't pause to realize that even if I had, a chips or a cookie or what have you, I still don't feel great, right? So I still have to go and deal with my original problem, whatever that was. Maybe I wasn't feeling excited because I didn't have anything exciting to wake up with. I didn't have a ritual, I didn't have a habit, or I didn't have any exciting projects going on, whatever that is, right? Or I wasn't just appreciating. So sometimes we try to find that supplement or that quick fix with something, but it still is not providing us that fix.
Yeah. One last thing I want to say about this whole fix thing, right? And the feelings and emotions. It reminds me of like, sometimes I go to the mall, and even like amazing malls, like in Dubai, they have one of the greatest malls in the world, right? And I remember like you go there and you feel good because you got the mall and you got nice food and there's a buzz and they got like this light show and fountains and everything and every shop you could possibly imagine, and it's all there, and hustle and bustle. It's all great. It's all brilliant, right? And then I went down to the prayer hall to pray. And when I got to the masjid and I prayed, that's actually when I felt at peace. And I felt
Mm.
and I felt like even though I'm in a place which has almost anything that I could want, where I actually felt the peace and the contentment and the ease was actually in the prayer room. And it's just insane, like because on one hand, the dunya is that kind of like plaything, and that it has those things where it kind of makes you feel like, oh yeah, this is gonna give me the emotions that I want. This is gonna give me the success and the feelings. But really, the feelings are so accessible, so easily, just through salah, just through these things. And like Allah tells us, it's only in the remembrance of Allah that that heart it finds that rest.
Absolutely. Very, yeah. And I think so I guess one question could be that why would people not do that? Like, so either we haven't tasted it or we forget
Mm,
about it. Uh, so perhaps it's that heedlessness that, okay, and I have this, the first attempt that I'm going to jump through is like the fleshy stuff, the malls, the TV, the YouTube, the TikTok, what have you. But then we have tasted it at some point, but then sometimes we have become so much on an autopilot mode that we don't realize to go back to it. Would that be one of
yeah.
the reasons, or?
I think there's two or three that reasons that come to my mind, right? So one, I think that um whatever we're used to habitually, I think that plays a big part, right? So
Mhm.
if I'm always used to, like, let's say going to work and I'm like, listening to music every day, if I'm habitually listening to that, for me to do something different, it takes work because I have to change an old habit, or I have to replace the old habit. So I think there's parts of us where habitually to feel good, we will just go to the normal things that we've been going to. So whether it's food, whether it's this, but whatever we've been going to, we will just habitually go to that. So that's one element. I think the second element is that no doubt shaitan is playing with us 24/7, right? So like, you might feel like you feel a certain way if you do something which is haram, but then you also get a good feeling by listening to the Quran. But the effort that it might take you to do a sin is like almost no effort, whereas the Quran can feel like an effort as well. So I think shaitan's constantly kind of playing with us in terms of doing that. But then again, I do think that, if you think about this, like our deep thing as humans is that we are into feeling certain feelings, and we can achieve certain feelings even just by sitting here, right? Like if I said to you, I want you to imagine, like, what is one of the happiest memories of your life, right? If you actually start to think about it, you close your eyes, you start to replay the moment, you start to feel it, you start to think about, like, you actually start to feel those emotions right here, right now, right? But sometimes we just opt for the quick and easy thing because as human beings, we can be really lazy and we just think, oh, if I can just have a nice double cheeseburger and that moment make me feel good, then that's quick and easy and I don't have to think about it. So those are some of the things I think it could be.
Good. And I think just on that point, like even as we realize those blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I think one thing is the cause, right? So sometimes people, so one option is people don't realize it. The second thing, they realize it, and but they don't realize it as blessing. They realize it as like, hey, this is what I've earned, right? It's, I hustled for
Mm,
it, I did this, and now I have this thing.
yeah.
And
So about this point then, right? So what we're saying is that there's different levels. So there are some people who you're saying they're heedless. They have no relationship with Allah. They don't see Allah as a provider at all, right? But then there's another level of it where, like, you know, we might even say, yes, I know Allah gives me money, okay, but like, do I really know that Allah gives me money? Because like when my job comes, like, there's a problem at work or something, and I might get fired, do I still think that my risk comes from Allah or for the job, right? And then there's also that ritualistic thing, like first month you get a job role, like when you're unemployed and you get a job, you're like, Alhamdulillah, thank you Allah so much, like, you got me a job, I'm gonna be able to do this and that. But then when the second pay comes in, you're like, yeah, it's my pay, you know. So I think one point, Zubair, maybe this is a good point to talk about it, is we call the law of familiarity, and they say familiarity breeds contempt, in the sense that as you get used to Allah's blessings, sometimes that's really bad for us, in the sense of us getting used to it is bad, right? Because
mhm.
Allah gives you something for the first time, like you've never had it, you've wanted it, you're asking Allah for it so much, and then Allah gives it, and then you're like so happy, you're so grateful to Allah, and then Allah gives you more, and you're happy, and then Allah gives you more, and then I'm wondering what does happen to our gratitude over time? Like as
Yeah.
Allah keeps giving you, does it go down or does it go up? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it goes down, right? Then you just like get used to it, right? And then we kind of feel also entitled to it, right? That I have,
Yeah.
and then on the contrary, if it were to be reduced or taken away,
Yes. Oh,
instead of being appreciated, that oh, subhanallah, I had it for 10 years, that's
yes.
amazing, right? We're like, oh, it go as if Allah
Why?
took away something
Yeah.
that
Why
belonged
did
to
Allah
me.
take it away from us? Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
We don't realize that, hey, what's that? I'm using this example these days. Like, if I'm traveling, I'm like, hey, you know what? I have my car. I'm traveling for a year. You guys can use my car, your family, whatever, enjoy it. Like, you use it as an extra car for the family. And when you come back, people will be like, oh, man, that was good. I just got to have a free car for a year. That was a good add on car for the family. And then most people would not have a problem giving the car back. But then, the way we feel about it is that I'm taking away their car. Bro, it wasn't your car. I
Yes.
gave it to you to have an extra,
Oh,
benefit to you.
so true. So, what do you think we can do when it comes to Allah's blessings to be constantly thanking Allah, especially for these things that just keep coming to us all the time? And how can we build that kind of mindset that you talked about, where we realize that whatever we have is that what we have, and what we don't have is actually never meant to be ours anyway.
Right. And I think so. One of the things, like, obviously, firstly, is like being aware of our thoughts, right? What am I actually thinking? And second thing is, we actually have a lot in the sunnah habits that we have, if we were to actually practice it and know what we are saying. So a lot of the prayers that we have, right? It says like, Alhamdulillah ladhi kasani hadha, Alhamdulillah ladhi at'amani hadha, right? All praise for Allah who fed me, who gave me this clothing. And then usually they will be accompanied by min ghairi hawlin minni wala quwwa, right? Without any power or ability to change from my end. So it's actually
Yeah.
emphasizing that component of it, even though the first component is saying that all praises are for Allah who gave me this. But then, in some of the du'as, it's actually explicitly saying min ghairi hawlin minni, right? So without any power and ability to change from me. And I think if we were to truly realize that look, yeah, you know what? There are other people who are putting in same amount of work and same amount of hustle as me, and maybe 10 times more, and maybe they are 10 times more talented than me. Then it's just happened to me that Allah made it happen for me. And there could be different asbab, the relation, the environment you are in, and whatnot. But then I think that really humbles you. That look, you know what? It's not from me. And once you have that mindset for things that you have, then you will have something similar for what you don't have, or when things are actually taken away from you. So it needs to
Yeah.
happen. Perhaps, as it says, like, those who remember Allah in times of ease, Allah will remember them in times of hardship. From a asbab perspective, if you have that sort of mindset for things that are coming to you, then when they're taken away, then you wouldn't feel that bad, because you're like, okay, alhamdulillah, I had it. And that could be for anything, materials thing, relationships, whatever, that alhamdulillah, it was not for me to begin with. Allah let me enjoy it. Alhamdulillah, it's gone now. Allah will give me something better, something different.
Yeah. I think this is a really, really important point, because when you think about all of these blessings, um, they are exactly like you said. Like, it's something that sometimes we trick ourselves, right? Like, I might do something, I might do a course, and I might start using it, and I think, you know what? I know all good is from Allah. Like, that whole, like, I know Allah is giving me my risk, all good is from Allah, but fundamentally, like, maybe it's because I did this college thing, because I went here. Like, there's still a little bit of thing that you think, right? And what
Mhm.
we would say, I guess, is that there is a thing which I did do, and there is a thing that every human being has, which is the choice, right? Because Allah's gonna hold us accountable for our choice, right? So it is true that we have, like, we can choose what our intention is. We can choose what action we want to take, and we could even do that. But it's very likely and possible, of course, that you could do this action and someone else could do this action. And then the results are not down to you. The results
Mhm.
of what you do is going to be down to Allah. So Allah could give you everything and give this person nothing, or give this person everything and give you nothing. So I think we need to realize, of course, within ourselves, we have responsibility, we have choice, and Allah is going to hold us responsible for those things that we choose and the intention that we make. But the result and what we get from those choices is always going to be from Allah, and we always want to be connected to that.
Fantastic. And I think that leads us to the next point, which is what's relatively in our control are the efforts, right? The efforts that we are putting in. And connecting that, like perhaps like, and what you mentioned earlier about a job, right? People who are actually struggle for a job, they acquire a degree or some sort of certification, and they just need a chance, right? I want someone to give me a chance, trust in me, invest in me, and give me that chance. And most of those people would really, really deliver and show you excellent results, and they're actually determined to do that. So I think if we were to take that analogy, obviously the greatest example is no one like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah has also given us this chance of the opportunities and the resources that we have. So everyone has something or the other, right? I mean, we may be focused on what we don't have, but we all have resources and opportunities and things that Allah has given us. Then the question becomes that if we appreciate that, like we would appreciate their job, or for entrepreneurs, like how we would appreciate like a good seed investment, right? Someone trusted in you. Hey, you know what? Here's $1 million paid over whatever X amount of years. Go ahead and build your idea, deliver on it. And if someone is really appreciative of it, they will be like, okay, now I have what I needed. I have what I asked for. Let me turn that into value for myself as well as for the investor. And that comes from efforts. And this is also what the Sheikh Ibn Qayyim mentioned in this book, that when you have this awakening of realizing the benefits, then you start thinking about like, what am I doing with those resources and that Allah has given me, and how either I'm not using it at all, or how I'm using it in areas of sin. So that's two options, right? One is you have it, you have time, you have energy, you have money, and then you're actually investing your time into sinful things, or you're not investing it into an appropriate thing, right? It's just like wasting and not making use of your life, your health, your focus, your energy, or your wealth.
Yeah, okay, great. So what we're saying is that no matter how bad your situation is, you have things that Allah has given you, right? And it reminds me, the other day I was eating uh, a piece of chicken, right? And I was thinking, this piece of chicken, I was saying to my kids as well, I was saying, this piece of chicken is actually here with me. Like, Allah could have given this specific piece of chicken to anyone in humanity throughout
Mhm.
history. But of all the people, Allah decided that this piece of chicken was going to end up with me, this specific one, right? And I'm saying that all the blessings we have, they're like that. Like, Allah has chosen specifically for you to have each of these blessings, even if your life is difficult. And the truth is, bro, like, most people today are living a life which is, uh, I would say almost everyone is living a life, I'm talking physically, better than what the Prophet ﷺ had. Like, if you think about our beds, if you think about, the fact that we can actually communicate with family through mobile phones, the fact that we have this and that and clean water and electricity, like the Prophet ﷺ had none of these things, right? None of these things. So for us, we still have a number of blessings which are above what the best people in history had, right? So even if we have a really bad situation, so I think one element is that, and then like you said, one part of it is actually thanking Allah in terms of your heart, right? In your heart, you thank Allah, and you know this is from Allah. A part of it is doing it in speech, like you're saying, which is where you do the du'as and the adhkar, where it's always recognizing Allah. But then I think the really important point you mentioned is actually about action, right? Like if Allah has given me all this knowledge, what am I going to do with it? How am I going to benefit myself and my family and people? If Allah give me these hands or these eyes, like am I going to use it for haram? Am I going to use it for sin? Or am I going to actually take these blessings and use it for good? So I think we've got to have this kind of holistic approach to these things, that not only is it something in our heart and in our tongues, but also, like you said, we go out and use it for good as well.
Fantastic. And what happens in the worldly sense, right? I mean, if someone gives you a job and you deliver really well at it, or someone invests in you and then you show them, hey, this is a massive value, here's a 10x return, what is likely to happen in the
They're going to
worldly
give you more.
sense?
They're going
You're
to
going
give
to
you
give them
more
more,
money.
right?
Okay, here,
Right.
take more money and do the same thing.
Right. Now, there's two things that happen in the world, right? One is sometimes, you may have excellent efforts, but you don't have results. You're not likely to get more investment, right? Because people are
True.
mostly after results in the world. And the
Yes.
second thing is sometimes you have excellent results, but you're not a good storyteller. So your marketing, is really poor, right? And then
Mm.
you may just get you didn't get the limelight, someone else with less results than you gets a better limelight and they get better investment, right? However, in general, if you were to take those elements out, and if the investor is true and you're true, then most likely you're going to get more opportunities, bigger bonus, more investments, so on and so forth. Now, from
Mm.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like walillahi al-mathalul a'la, right? First of all, He sees it in and out. He sees the effort that you have put in, right? And that's the promise that He has made, and He's the one who is truest in His promise, right? La in shakartum la azidannakum. If you are thankful, I'll give you more. So if you utilize what Allah has given you properly with the proper efforts, Allah will definitely give you more. You don't need to do marketing with Allah. You don't need to show results to Allah, because He sees your efforts, He sees your intention.
Mm. And this could even be at the level of literally your intention, right? Like
Mhm.
it could even just be that you're like you know what? As soon as I finish university, I'm actually going to go out and I'm going to do 5 hours a week of da'wah, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And if you don't even like make it to that age, you will get that intention because Allah knows you were sincere to do it, right? And then
Right.
in addition, like you said, if you actually say, "Oh Allah, like I'm so grateful for this blessing you gave me, and because of this blessing, I'm now going to go do this," like that just means you've just earned yourself more, right? And this is like so important, because a lot of the time the reason why we feel like negative emotions is because we feel at a loss, and we know that when Allah says something, like it's how we look at the rules of gravity and physics, and we see them as like it's always going to work. Like if I pour water, it's going to go to the bottom, right? We should see Allah's statements in exactly the same way. So when Allah says, like, if you give thanks, I will increase you, this is like the ultimate guarantee. Like, there's no human being that can guarantee you like Allah guarantees you, right? So if Allah is saying, like, just give me thanks and I will increase you. And I'm saying that this is like such a big secret that even the non Muslims who don't even believe in Allah, I'm talking atheists, would say you should be grateful and you should have this attitude of gratitude and all this stuff, because Allah will even give to the non Muslims. Allah doesn't just give to us, right? He gives to everyone and He increases everyone. So for us, if there's something lacking in our lives, if there's something missing, the secret is just to thank Allah for it more and more.
Absolutely. Yes. So yeah, it then becomes a question about like, what am I doing, as opposed to like, what am I missing, right? And
Mm,
but just to pick up on the other point that I think intentions are really good, because we have this hadith of the four, right? People like with good resources and good intention, right? So he has a resource, he has good intentions, he's already doing it. And the opposite there was someone with good intentions, good knowledge, but he doesn't have the resources. And the Prophet ﷺ said that they are in the reward, they are same, right? And also the opposite, right? Someone with resources and really, really bad actions, and someone without resources but intention. Hey, if I had money, I would have this sort of lifestyle as well. And they are also in the reward same. But on the flip side of the same thing is also, what are you doing about it today? Because many people have these things. You know what? When I have X amount of money, when I reach this stage, when I reach this age, then I will do X, Y, Z. And I think that could be really dangerous, because the main thing is like, okay, what are you doing about it today, right? So whatever you have, how are you using those resources and showing it? And because we don't know if we'll reach this stage or not, we don't sometimes even know if we are true in our intention, because we could have
mm,
theoretical intention and they may not be true intention, and Allah sees it through. So a good way of measuring if we are true in our intention or not is to see what we are doing with what we have today.
yeah, and I think this is a really good point, and I think that there's a hadith that actually really pushes us to move beyond the intention, right? Because Allah tells us that the deeds loved most by Him are those that are regular, even if they're small, right? So
Mhm.
in that example where I said, like, you know what, when I finish university, I'm going to go out and give 5, 10 hours of dawah a week and all this kind of stuff. What we should be doing is how could we, reduce this to the simplest version of doing that and do that right now.
Yeah.
So imagine, like, if I have that attitude in a year or two, when I finish uni, I'm going to give dawah 10 hours a day. It'll be so much more beneficial for me in terms of reward, in terms of development, in terms of everything. If I instead of that, I just, you know what, instead of me doing 10 hours, let me just go and join a charity like IRA, and they've got dawah chat. Let me just do chat from my house for 1 hour a week, 1 hour a week. That's all I know. I can do an hour, right? And just do that consistently until that point. That deed would connect you to Allah so deeply. It will be so beneficial for your growth. It will be so beneficial for you. Inshallah, people become Muslim because of the dawah you're doing. All this, like this whole kind of snowball effect happens by you taking that action and doing that little bit of work. So I think, like, having that thing where you've got to show some skin in the game. You've got to put something, you gotta put your, they say put the metal to the pedal, right? You gotta, like, do something to take action on the intention, because a lot of us, we do have good intentions, but you're right, like, we just don't start, we just don't take action. And if you can reduce it to the smallest possible thing and take some action, that's when you'll see your intention become an action. That's when you'll see massive benefit from it.
Fantastic. And that leads me to the other point of, like, really being about, how, so remember how we said, like, okay, either you may be using your resources for sins, 100% sin, like clear sins, right? No doubt about it. Second thing, you're not using your resources appropriately. And I think Allah Alam, right? Sometimes we think, okay, how come the people of religion, right, or apparent religion are not very successful, right, in terms of their results or productivity, what have you? That's a perception generally, and it has some sort of truth, especially in today's age and whatnot. And one of my observation, and Allah knows best, and this comes to what you mentioned earlier about, like, what happened last week and continuing with Andrew Tate as an example, right? So people who are talking about him like the whole last week, and pretty much every famous speaker has had a video about him and so on and so forth. So I think one of my observation has been that all these people who are the audience and the presenters and whatnot, who are
Mm,
apparently from the people of Deen, have some sort of like zeal for the Deen. Are we effectively using our time, right? So for example, if and also another thing that also happened last weekend was quote unquote Islam won, right? Pun intended, right? So
yeah,
that was also a massive thing, and people invested a lot of time and energy in it, and I think some sort of fun and whatnot. Obviously, there's no harm with it, but my personal observation is that sometimes we do a lot of these things and we may spend like hours and hours on it as a spectator, talking
mm,
about other people, either praising them or criticizing them, as opposed to figuring out, like, what am I doing myself, right? How do I move away from that spectatorship
yeah,
to being a producer, to being a contributor?
yeah. And I think one of the things you'll find very interesting is that, most of the people that are really big on these platforms, they don't actually use the platforms in the way that the normal public do, right?
Mm,
And I'm not even big on social media, but, like, I don't really consume social media. I'm all over social media in terms of for my audience, but I don't go on there. Even myself, get my team to kind of post and do all that stuff, because the benefit of something like that should be from a producer mindset rather than a consumer mindset, right? And so, like, you're right. Like, when you get deep into these things, there's a lot of issues with all of that. But the biggest thing, I think, what you're saying is that the time that you actually spend and the effort that you're exerting on all that stuff could be applied to the awakening, could be applied to your own blessings. Because fundamentally, when we're talking about awakening the soul, we're talking about you actually connecting with Allah, you connecting your heart to Allah, you doing deeds for the sake of Allah. Like, it all comes out in you actually doing things, right? And it can't just be that it's a heart thing where in my heart I just feel good and close to Allah, and then nothing happens in my actions or my ibadah or anything like that. So I think that, like you said, those levels where you're not using it for good, and then you're kind of wasting it, and then you're kind of utilizing it and using it. And I think habits, by the way, are a very good way of doing this, because, like we said, Allah values a lot, even if it's something small. Like if there was a guy who read the whole Quran, once in a while, once in a while, once in a while, maybe the guy who reads one ayah of Quran every day, maybe his deeds are bigger in the sight of Allah, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And just to lastly, to pick up on that point, like, so even let's say you're appreciating and you're being a consumer, a spectator for something, and you're really appreciating that. So two examples from last week. Okay. It's, from Islam's performance and his winning and keeping his identity as a Muslim. So these are two things, right?
Yeah.
One is how hard work these guys have put in their own bodies
Yes.
and training and that work ethics, and then keeping their Muslim identity and not hiding it. So I would then pose these two questions to ourselves that
Mm,
what am I doing to have that sort of discipline for my body and my heart as well, right? The heart
brilliant.
muscle and preventing it from sins and doubts and whatnot, as well as being careful about my choices of eating and putting in some sort of a physical training. And then, am I a publicly Muslim person? Like, do people around me know about who I am as a Muslim, right? And
Mm,
subhanAllah, just the call that I was having before this call, as a brother, and he wants to learn now about the deen, and he's like really successful entrepreneur. He has had like a massive exit from a IT business to keep it
sure.
and not to be very identifying. But what he has done is, like, one of the things now he does is like, what, I don't care. Even, I'm not saying that we should do it, but he is to a point that his Adhan app is on. So even when he's in the meeting and he was having meetings with top product companies, he's like, oh, I didn't know that you were Muslim. So all this time, this lady didn't know about him being a Muslim, but now he's like, what, I'm going to be publicly Muslim, right? I will take time for prayer, what have you. The point is, like, am I shy enough to take that time, what have you? I'm just trying to blend in. And the second thing with Tate is like, okay, well, that's great, about his conversion and, his friends and what have you. But what have I done? Maybe I can take this motivation or inspiration and say, hey, who is in my network that I deal with, that I see day in and day out, but I haven't told them about what Islam is. So perhaps I can
Mm.
take this challenge and inspiration, and I know how to explain it, and I'll just go and share that message with him.
Yeah, there's some excellent points you raised there, because one of the things I was thinking about is like, why is Islam and Khabib and these guys, why are they so influential? The reason why they're so influential is because of the excellence that they've
Mhm.
brought to the sport that they're in, right? Like if they were just like half nobodies or whatever, like the reason why people kind of see them all over the place and rate them is because they are excellent at what they do. And you can imagine the amount of effort and time and training and pain and sweat and blood and tears that have gone into getting that. And I think that that level of excellence is respected by everyone, Muslim, non-Muslim, young, old, everyone who knows that respects it. But the difference is that when these guys then come out, what is Khabib's famous pose? It's basically that. It's like Allah, always Allah, right? So one of the great, and this is something, by the way, they say about great leaders, is that they have very high ambition, right? They have high ambition, high standards, high excellence, high all of that. But with most people that have all of that, what you'll find is they have high ego and high arrogance. Okay, but the best leaders and people like Habib and these guys are the ones that have high ambition, high standards, but then they have lots and lots of humility, right? So when you then combine that humility, and in the case of these people who are Muslim, the humility is, I know all of this is from Allah. So when you're in that position of excellence, it's the hardest place to actually be humble. But these guys have shown that next level of humility where they realize that the results are from Allah. And when they get to that stage, they put Allah first, whether it's if in their speaking or when they're doing sujood or talking about Allah, and they have this confidence and this bravery that people respect. And if you look at a lot of what Andrew Tate's been saying, he's been saying that he just respects Islam and Muslims so much in terms of the way they behave in the face of everything that's going on, that it's inspired him to actually look into it further and then eventually become Muslim, alhamdulillah, right? So for us, there's this one level where we should be learning from these guys in terms of being excellent in our field, having high standards. And then, like we're talking about today, having that humility to know that it all comes from Allah. And then the battle is to just keep doing more and keep thinking like that.
Absolutely. And so two things about this humility, right? And I think if people realize it, so one is obviously it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mean, had Allah put in some sort of, like, again, there's effort that you can put in, and then there's also, like, what's coming in from Allah's subhanahu side, what's coming in from gene, what's coming in from different health issues and whatnot. So that part is hopefully people realize that look, if Allah didn't give you that basic foundation, that efforts, that ability, then you won't be able to get to that stage that you are. And secondly, I mean, I don't have like exact data to prove it, but I've seen like data that definitely indicates it. I don't think that, for example, I'm sure, Allahu Alam, it's very likely that there are people who are as well trained as Habib or as well trained as Islam, right, and have that sort of capability, and maybe like even better or more courageous, right? I mean, obviously there are people who fight for the cause and whatnot and different things, and they're even able to like go into a fight where they know that they may not even come back alive, right? So and things like that. So what I'm trying to say is that I think there are people who are better skilled, but just didn't have that sort of opportunity to showcase that. And I think that's also from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's where, being pleased with the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is really, really important, because as we were mentioning earlier about the results versus efforts, that results are not usually a full indication of efforts, because the full results will be إِنَّمَا تُوَفَّوْنَ أُجُورَكُمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ, right? You will be fully compensated your reward on the day of judgment. So many times you will see just partial results of your effort. You may not see like full accomplishment of that, but that doesn't mean that they're being ignored. And at the same time, if Allah chooses someone for whatever reason, then it may be hard, but that's what we need to realize, that look, Allah chose them for a reason. And this choosing does not mean, so for example, if there's a fighter who has really, really worked hard and has really mastered those skills, and he doesn't get what Islam or Habib got, that doesn't necessarily mean that Allah loves them more. But at the same time, understand that this is a choice of Allah, and not fall into what Shaitan fall into, is that why is Adam being chosen and not me?
And I think this is a really good point, bro, because one thing I think that we should all get better at is thinking good thoughts of Allah, right? Because a lot of the time when we get into these situations, especially when like we've lost a blessing or something's happened or all this kind of stuff, like calamity strikes, whatever, it's very easy for us to go to a place where we start like thinking negatively of Allah, right? And we start thinking, maybe Allah this, maybe Allah that. You just like even not even questioning, but just thinking things like that. And if we start to really understand Allah in terms of how He feels towards His slaves, towards His
Mhm.
servants, and what Allah actually does for us, because there's a level where Allah gives to everyone. We know that Allah gives
Mhm.
oxygen to everyone to breathe and live and food and all this kind of stuff. But the way He feels towards believers is very different to everyone else, right? And so if Allah feels like that towards you, like we hear all these hadith where Allah is more merciful to you than your mother, and all these kind of encounters that we know about. If we actually truly believe in them, and then we're like, okay, imagine like your mom was in control of your qadr, right? Just for a second, like imagine that, yeah. Like me personally, I would trust my mom fully to be in it. If there was a human being who's going to control like what my path was going to be, I would love it for it to be my mom, because I know our mums, alhamdulillah, may Allah preserve them and protect them. They're so giving and they're so much there for us and they love us so much and all that stuff, right? So I'm like, yes, I would go mom. But if you have a choice between Allah and your mum, you go with Allah, right?
Yeah.
Because Allah is much better for you. Allah is the most merciful. Allah is all these things. So we need to constantly remind ourselves when we're in that situation that Allah is more merciful to you than you could be to yourself. So if you have a situation that comes up that is not to your liking, we have to keep thinking of Allah. Look, Allah is my savior. Allah is the one that gives me everything. Allah is this. Allah is this. Allah is this. Like there's got to be something here. And part of this is that whole coaching of yourself, right? Because of course people can help you, reminders, all this stuff, but deep down it's you and you. So you have to say to yourself, listen, you know what? Don't worry, Allah's got you. Do not just think of this in this way. Think good thoughts for Allah. If Allah wanted good for you, how could this situation be good? And so I think as we do that more, the more that we will feel better. But also, tell me about, there's a hadith, I think, about how I am to my slave as he thinks of me or something as well.
Right, absolutely right. Yeah. So yes, so that's this hadith Qudsi, right, in which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is quoting from Allah that I am to my slave as he thinks of me, right? And so let him think of me what he wishes, right? So obviously, like you can have this other extreme where it's like, okay, I'll just keep doing whatever, and then Allah will forgive me, right? Then this
Yeah,
other
yeah,
extreme, and then you don't know Allah, right? And you're making those sort of claims. But to this point about the mother, bro, I think that's actually a great example because people can relate to it. I think today you're saying that, you know what, you will be fine with having your mother control it, whatnot, from the example that you mentioned. Uh, However, at least for me, like, growing up, I couldn't understand all the decisions my mom was making, right? And like, no, why is she like, why can't I play all the time? Why can't I on my game box all the time, right? Why do I have to go? So I mean, she had mashallah a lot of reward her and protect her, like, schedule for us, right? So I can't be on the TV all the time. You have to have study time,
Yeah.
whatnot, and also the outside time and playing cricket on the streets and what have you. So you're getting your physical activity and some sort of a sleep schedule and whatnot. And then obviously growing up, you're like, oh man,
Yeah.
I wish I had not I didn't have all these restrictions, right? So today I can appreciate that, but so similarly, sometimes we don't appreciate that those boundaries or limitations or restrictions from Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. But then, as we age and as we realize that we have better appreciation, and there are things that we still don't fully appreciate, and then as time goes on, we will, or at
This
least
is big thing right now, Zubair, where I've been hearing a lot of people talk about this. Like a lot of people I've been coaching, they've been talking about their parents being controlling.
Mm,
Someone said to me that it's something that's very common over the internet now, where a lot of youngsters are going, like, my parents are controlling me, right? And I'm like, is parents controlling you a bad thing, right? And naturally,
mm,
you're a teenager, you think, yeah, parents controlling you is a bad thing, right? But let's say that my son, may Allah protect him, he sees a fire there and he wants to put his hand in it. Do I just go, well, we live in 2022. Children should be free to do what they want. Okay, then go for it, no problem. Like, if I did that, or anyone said that's okay, they would say he's insane. You must
mm,
stop your child from burning himself, right? So this notion of like control is one of those things where over here it looks like control, but what it actually is something totally different. And a lot of this is how we interpret what actually happened. And so everyone is fine with us controlling a child if it comes to them harming themselves, hurting themselves, something like that. And so sometimes what happens is Allah will allow something to happen, and that averts something else from you. That saves you from something else. And sometimes it takes years for you to see it, right? Like you don't see it, but then when you connect the dots later, you're like, SubhanAllah, you know what? I only got that job because I met that brother, and I met that brother because this happened. And wow, SubhanAllah, amazing. But at the time, it's really
yeah.
terrible. Like one of my friends, he got made redundant, and obviously he was broken when he got made redundant. But then after that, he got a contracting job, which like he got paid so much money, and then he bought a house and another house, and he just and think about his redundancy now. He'll be thinking this is the greatest thing Allah gave me ever. So we've got to have that kind of mindset of interpreting what happens to us in the best way as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Because I think sometimes the doors are shut down to us, and then that's to force us to try another door, and that leads to better success and better results with subhanallah. And just moving on to the other point, just to from this perspective, so one once has this awakening, they try to use the resources that they have properly. And so the way that the Sheikh explains here is like, okay, these good deeds that you do, they now wipe away the bad deeds that you have done. Okay, and it actually gives you different stages to that, and that's what we're going to talk about. And also related to people are like, well, how come someone like Andrew or someone like this convert to Islam? And that's why people have this struggle, because again, they just try to compute everything by themselves. They don't realize that, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has layers, and he has full wisdom and full visibility that you and I don't have. And someone changing today doesn't mean much. And tawbah is not a trigger. You can't say, okay, you know what, I'm going to flick the light switch of tawbah today, and then boom, I'll get repentant and I'll get all my sins erased. Because none of us know what stage we will die on. So the Shaykh Ibn al-Qayyim, he mentions here that what happens now once you have this stage, then you have these four elements to tap into, right? One is your true repentance, which is a nature of heart, right? That you're actually sorry for what you did. You're like, oh man, that was a great time. I loved it. And you know what? I'm glad that now I'm gonna be cleansed by Islam. And boom, right? That's not tawbah. If you have still desires for those things, that will get manifested somehow later on. So that's a tricky thing to be in. So if you have true repentance and you're actually asking Allah for forgiveness, and then you do good works to wipe out the bad things that you have done. And then lastly, this is another great area, which is the hardships in life. So different calamities and different pains that we face in this life, they also become a source of cleanser, right? And that's like just again purifying gold with fire or what have you. And this also gives you a different way to look at hardships when you try something and you don't get it, or something that you had is now taken away. So if you view it as a way of Allah cleansing you and you're being thankful, you're trusting in the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it acts as a big cleanser for you. That's a different mindset than, oh, why did Allah take it away from me? He doesn't like me. I did so many good things. I was praying and now he takes it away from me, right?
Mm. Okay, excellent. So you're saying that there's four ways that we can actually purify ourselves. One is repenting truly. Another is seeking forgiveness, and then doing good deeds, which will actually extinguish the bad deeds. And then you're saying that the things that happen to us, which are difficult and hard, they would actually also help us, right? Because they would kind of purify us and they would raise our ranks because we're going through those trials, right? And it's like
Yeah,
the
if
hadith,
properly.
like uh, the exact wordings I remember. It's about like not even a thorn pricks him, except that he gets rewarded for it. So
Exactly.
like there's pain in that thorn, right? So what that means is that if something happens and like I lose my job, then I feel emotional pain. Like it doesn't just mean physical pain, right? It means that if I go through trauma or pain psychologically or in my emotions, I'd get rewarded for that as well. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yes. Right. And this really gives you a different lens to look at life because it's everything, right? So for example, your wife does something that you don't like, husband does something that you don't like, doesn't listen to you, or does something, the child does something, is disobedient. Every sort of thing, like even to the point, like, the companions, their horse not listening to them and misbehaving to them, they would also use that as a thing of like, okay, that's a
Mhm.
cleanser for me, right? That's not to say that you're not going to rectify the behavior and take appropriate action, but now your mindset is different, right? You come with more compassion. You're actually appreciating. That's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's like, how dare she did that to me, or how dare you did this to me, and you're in a revenge and anger form, right? You have a different perspective of it.
SubhanAllah, this is quite deep now. This point, right? The reason why it's deep is because I don't even I feel like I'm strong in my mindset and my coaching myself. I don't think I apply this principle well enough. And the reason I'm saying is like, let's imagine we turned um, good deeds and Allah's raising of ranks and stuff. Let's imagine just for a second we thought of it as money, okay? Because
Mhm.
money is very tangible. That's why I like the idea of money, right? So
Yeah,
now imagine I'm walking downstairs, right, and I accidentally stub my toe, and I say something like La ilaha illallah, I say Alhamdulillah, or I say whatever, right? And then suddenly I get a text message on my phone saying Allah just deposited $5,000 into your account for that toe. I'm like,
absolutely.
oh,
Yes.
okay. Alhamdulillah, that's great. Like, okay, it wasn't so bad. And I got $5,000, right? And then I go downstairs and then, someone's rude to me. And I just like, I react right, I'm patient, or I just stay quiet or whatever. And I get another message saying, oh, Allah's just deposited $20,000 for you. I'm like, huh? What? I'm like, this is quite cool. Like, I could actually, like, I'm fine. What's going to happen next? Like, let me see what I can handle? But we don't look at it like that at all. And I think this is the whole thing around if you can actually like visualize the akhirah and bring it to today and then have that trust, because some of it is actually to do with trust as well, right? Like we don't really know, if we're doing the right thing and all these kind of things, and Allah really going to forgive me, all this kind of stuff, even though Allah tells you He will forgive you and everything. But
Right.
like if you have this mentality, like just imagine how you would operate if every time you felt any sort of negativity, any sort of pain, any sort of hurt, where you just saw yourself like receiving goodness from Allah, like it could transform the way you look at these things, I think.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And I like that example that, I'm actually using that last week and I was doing a Dawa training. And one of the things that we in Dawa training, people miss out, they think that they see these all videos on social media. They think every engagement is going to be a conversation. They don't realize that there are people who are just going to outright reject you, either politely or slightly rudely. Same things with new Muslims and what have you. And as part of the training, I'm like, okay, let's get used to rejection. Let's start a
Mm,
conversation and the other person actually
yeah.
rejects you. And I actually literally had this thing. I'm saying, imagine you're getting $1,000. I didn't think of 5,000. Maybe you were a different bracket there, but I was like, let's imagine you're getting $1,000 for every rejection. So you try to invite
Wow.
someone, they don't respond back, you're getting
Yeah.
$1,000. Like, and it's not like this happens in the sales
Bro,
world.
I
You
would say
only
90% of Muslims would be out on the street doing dawah every day, bro.
Yeah, that's
Even if a
fine. You say
thousand
no.
people.
Yeah, that's not on me, right? You reject,
Yeah.
fine.
SubhanAllah. Amazing.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also, subhanAllah, a lot of people are dealing with traumas and different types of traumas these days. And I'm not saying that, sometimes you need a deeper level of intervention and therapists and what have you, but just looking at the world from this perspective, And if you use that, okay, why did I go through all this hardship in my childhood and whatnot, or my marriage, or whatever it is, right? Then you can see that, look, there was a reason behind it. And if you were to take a sports analogy, right, that's like, okay, someone, trying to change their body, obviously the good food that you eat or the workout that you do, that kind of cleanse away the bad food choices that you have made. And then if you go and join like a boot camp, right? I mean, Islam and Khabib, all these guys, they go through like these fight camps. It's like really intense pressure, like a week long, or I don't know, 10, 2 weeks or what have you, where they're like now in intense pressure that gives them this opportunity to cleanse yourself. So similarly, some like, it's not just like a very superficial thing. Actually, when you are in hardship and you use it properly, that really slows you down, and that really gives you this bonding with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And we see this with people too, right? A couple or friends or partners who have gone through a tough time in business or life together, usually their bond also like strengthens. So similarly, I mean, much better than that. Obviously, when you go through this with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you're making dua to him, and you see him taking you out of that calamity, and you see him turning things around for you, that sort of relationship and that sort of sweetness is not something that people can typically experience with, when things are going easy peasy.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about like the situations, like when things are going really bad for you, if you have iman, like you're so close to Allah. Like the
Yeah.
way you do sujood when you're like desperate and you're like in problems and this and that, those sujood are not the same as when you're just chilling and everything's good. And and a lot of what I'm trying to do is trying to like Sheikh Muhammad rahimahullah, he would say that, would it be better for you to be in prison? And we talked about this last time, right? And we were saying that for some people it would be bad that you're in a bad situation because you're really closer to Allah. So I think a lot of our work is about trying to be grateful to Allah in times of ease and be good in times of ease. So it's good for us to be in those times rather than us being in these situations when we're there. But of course, no matter what you do, this life will give you pain and problems and issues. And the key is, like you just said, like for us to remember that for the mu'min, everything is rewarded. Everything is rewarded. You just gotta react in a good way, and that's it. Like, you just react in a good way, and I'm talking about, like, emotionally and with your tongue, like, suddenly everything is good for you, inshallah.
Beautiful. And lastly, to wrap it up, if people were to use that, and then it is with the mercy of Allah, all these four areas are like sufficient enough, then they become so. Keeping that end in mind, I think like for example, let's say you have a vacation or holiday coming up, and you might be going through a tough time at work or school, like, but yeah, that's fine. Even end of the week, I'm going out on vacation. You kind of look forward to that as you struggle through the different things in life. Similarly, this is what the author paints for us, that if all these things come in and this hardship, they cleanse you, then you reach this state of purification, and you become from the people that angels will descend down to you and give you this glad tidings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Fussilat, which says, ألا تخافوا ولا تحزنوا وأبشروا بالجنة التي كنتم توعدون نحن أولياؤكم في الحياة الدنيا وفي الآخرة ولكم فيها ما تشتهي أنفسكم ولكم فيها ما تدعون. So do not fear and do not grieve, and receive the good tidings of Jannah that you have been promised. We were your allies in this world, and also your allies, your protectors, your true friends in the Akhirah. And you will have whatever you desire there, and you will have whatever you have been promised. However, if that's all these things are not enough, with the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, perhaps you didn't have a good repentance, perhaps the things that you have done are like way higher, perhaps you didn't go through hardships, perhaps the hardship that you went through, you were still like cursing and saying bad things and not went through it properly, and so on and so forth. Then you have these different stages, like the stage of the qabr or the day of judgment, those trials. And then finally, if none of that is good enough, none of that is sufficient for what you have done, is then there is purification that happens in the fire. But finally, with the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will finally reach the stage of the Jannah. However, obviously, we do not want to delay till all these different stages of barzakh and day of judgment and what have you. So whatever efforts that we are putting in this life and embracing the hardship that we face, with goodness, with good thinking, is really, really beneficial.
Hmm. This reminds me of debt, right? They say that most people, for example, even in the richest country in the world, like America, like most people are in debt. Okay, and we live in a world where to just be at zero is actually like an
Mm.
achievement, right? And it kind of makes me think about Yom Al Qiyamah, that from a sin perspective, if you're at zero, you won. You won the game, basically. Yeah. If you meet Allah and there's zero sins for you, because Allah forgave, not that you didn't do any, but Allah forgave them, you were purified, and you meet Allah with zero sins, you win the game. Being at zero, you win the game. And the key is that we know that even one sin will be a massive burden for us in Yom Kippur. So the aim of the game is actually to just get rid of these sins. Get rid of these sins to purify ourselves. And sometimes Allah will do that through calamities and all these things. But there's a massive chance for us to actually purify ourselves. And like this is one of the things, like if you start looking into something like istighfar, like actually doing istighfar, the amazing ayah of Quran where it talks about how Allah will open up the skies for you and give you rizq, and this just if you seek forgiveness. And so not only is it good for us from a Yom Al perspective, but even from dunya perspective, it's so beneficial to just rid ourselves of these sins. And I think the big important thing to remember, especially sometimes when you look at religious people, we think that the good Muslims are the ones that don't do sins. That's
Yes.
not true. The good ones are the ones that actually keep turning back to Allah, and Allah forgives them. Like this is the big thing, that the best person is the one that keeps seeking repentance from Allah, keep actually asking Allah for forgiveness. And I think this is the kind of habit that we need to build. Why is it that the Prophet ﷺ would seek istighfar at least 70 times a day? Like it should boggle our mind, really, isn't it? That someone comes and says, "Okay, this human being, all sins are forgiven," and then the
Mhm.
same being is constantly saying astaghfirullah, seeking forgiveness, like this. What about us losers, right? Like who are so low down? What should we be doing? So I think the name of the game is that none of us want anyone's sins, and we should be really working on getting to zero.
Fantastic, bro. And yes, so just from an action perspective, continuing on that, actually, that's what he also mentioned. Once you have this awakening and you realize this, have this right realization of this role, then you get to this state of deepening and your focus shift. You start finding out for me and what is for me in different life, all these different areas of life, and then you focus on what I do to get and move toward the non-beneficial or harmful things.
So
And
it's a bit.
yeah,
It was just cutting out a little bit. If you could just repeat that last part you were saying, so when we get further down, we get into deep thinking. If you could just tell me a bit about that.
right. So when you have this deep thinking, and then you say, and then you realize, look, Allah has given me this thing. What do I want to do with what Allah has given me, with my life, with the resources I have? And then you start having a differentiation and distinction between what is actually beneficial to me and what is actually not beneficial to me. And then you have this desire to actually go towards what is beneficial to me. But he makes a very interesting point that not only you're going towards what's beneficial for you, within that going towards what's beneficial to you, you also have this distinction of which path is better and which path is harmful. So even if you realize Ta'ala is better for me, or doing dawah is better for me, doing charity is better for me, you have paths that can actually be harmful. We talked about some of these things earlier, social media, same thing with dawah and what have you. So sometimes the path itself can be harmful. So not only have your destination right, but also choose the path, right? As we say, like means do not justify the end.
Hmm.
Any thoughts on that? And then let's wrap up on
Yeah,
that point.
sorry. Yeah, just got cut off a little bit.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. So what we're saying is that you need to have that deep thinking for you to start to come to some realizations and distinctions. And then part of that is realizing what is harmful, what is beneficial. And then from there, actually selecting and choosing a path which is beneficial and maybe even most beneficial to you. Right. And so this is really good, because practically this could look like, for example, let's imagine that I really love fasting, right? It
Mm-hmm.
might mean that I thank Allah and I connect to Allah through fasting regularly. Okay. Or it could be that I really don't like fasting, and I'm like, you know what, I love being in sujood, so I'm just gonna pray tahajjud every day. I'm gonna connect to Allah in that way. Or that I really, really find that when I'm driving, I like listening to Quran. I'm gonna do that. So even like finding these kind of things which are beneficial. And sometimes I do this, like like yesterday even, I was very tempted to just watch YouTube, and it was gonna be something like not haram, but just probably less beneficial, right? And then I was like, you know what? What's the topic I'm really interested in? Like, which is kind of related to Islam. I was like, let me put that on. So I kind of watched that, and then at the end of it, I was kind of happy. Alhamdulillah. I'm like, you know what? This half an hour I spent was so much more beneficial than the other half an hour I would have spent, even though haram. But just spending this time on this has been so beneficial, inshallah, for me by
Mhm.
doing that. I think sometimes it's just those little decisions where you got to tweak what you want to do so that you choose something more beneficial for your dunya and for your akhirah, inshallah.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I think if I were to use one point, I think it's just like, again, awareness and being awakened and just not being
Mm,
autopilot. Right? I think if we were just pause, so two things. One is to having some sort of plan, and then the second thing is, goes with the habits and all the routines that we talk about within the habits as well. To the 5 second rule, whatever. The point being is just like being aware when you make choices, right? Not just like, oh, I'm not feeling good. Okay, maybe I'll have this cookie, or maybe I'll have this donut. Or I'm not feeling good. I'm waking up. Maybe I'll just scroll through my phone and like see what's up on YouTube. Or just like pausing and seeing like, is that the right choice? As you just gave this in
mm. And
that example.
such a good point, bro, because pausing is actually the key. And recently I met with Sheikh Haytham, and he was giving me some really good advice. And he was saying to me, one of the things that you want to do more of is things like tadabbur, like actually
Mhm.
thinking about the Quran. And I was telling him about the stuff that we're doing. And if you guys are not subscribed, you should subscribe, because we're doing this series where we actually go into the Quran and start thinking about it. And the reason why thinking about the Quran is so good is because it kind of like it's a break from everything else that's going on, and it's shocking your system to become more aware, right? As Allah's talking about all these subjects, and you're learning about Allah and you're thinking about this stuff, it engages you in a different way. And so I think like this whole connection with the Quran, as well as like obviously Salah being something which is disconnecting you from everything. These are all awakening points, right? Like imagine if I have an argument with someone and then I go and I pray salah. If I do a proper salah and I think about that, maybe it would change my behavior when I get back, as opposed to if I didn't pray salah and I was just all day in that environment. So this awakening can actually come with every salah, but salah is one of those things where you're gonna get what you put into it as well, right? So it's that whole thing around actually working at these deeds so that you can become more awake, because nothing will awaken you, I guess, like the Quran.
Yes, that is so beautiful, right? And then because we have actually, when we ask for how do we do this, how do we become more aware, how do we do this? So we have all these checkpoints and things that are already prescribed in Sunnah. And I'm not saying that just doing it, just going through the motion and just making time for it, definitely is way better than not doing it. However, for those who have reached that stage, now it's the point of taking like, okay, how do I do it properly so that I do benefit from it? Like if I were to use this analogy, they said like, even if you don't want to work out, and you being in the gym for 15 minutes is better than not going, right? And most likely you will
Mm,
do something, you'll move something, or you'll walk, or you'll get inspired.
true.
But then the next level is, are you using it properly, right? Because then if you're not using it properly, then you're just like losing a lot of gains, right? So similarly, the du'as we talked about it, or the salah or the Quran, if we properly use it, then that would just really set it up for a lot of these transformations that we're talking about.
Mm, inshallah.
Brilliant. Okay, bro. Thank you so much for that. Inshallah, we'll meet up in the next episode. Until then, assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.